All right, so we're back to Elder Holland's talk. There has been this week a lot of fallout and reaction to this. Really a lightning rod for many. And I wanted to go over that a little bit on both sides and talk a little bit about what I perceive to be as hyperbole to some degree, and maybe a couple of points where I think we could have done just a little bit better with this. But first of all, I want to talk about a couple points here that are not being brought up out there very much, and if at all, and I think that they're important. First of all, one of the issues here that we have is that this seems to be a flashpoint of the family, of the family proclamation. And we can't forget that. We can get distracted by muskets and by valedictorian speeches and a lot of different things, and I'm going to go over that. But the primary issue here is the proclamation on the family. It's the doctrine of the family. He covers that. He says that. And so regardless of what you think of that, you may be somebody who thinks that needs to change. Fine, right? That's fine. But don't get caught up into the minutia on all of these things and distractions. The bottom line is this is about the doctrine of the family. And I would say, and I'm not going to go into that here, I did a little bit in the previous episode, and radicalization, right? That the radicalization of students at BYU under the mentorship of certain professors. That's really what this was about. Now, certainly, the points that were brought up here that everyone seems to be coalescing around one way or the other are focused on LGBTQ issues and the doctrine on the family. There were a few different examples that were brought up. There's the language, symbols, and situations that are divisive that he brings up. You're talking about probably like pride flags and a number of other things. He talks about, I think it's Matt Easton, who he says commandeered the valedictorian speech to come out with his sexual orientation, okay? And then third, you have these, what I believe are the situations, are the protests that he's actually talking about as musket fire coming at him or at the church, the stray rounds that are going up to Salt Lake. Pretty sure that's all about the protest. So there's another thread here that is not being discussed above and beyond the LGBTQ issue. And that is activism here. That's what he's saying, I think, is look, we can't allow all of this activism coming from the university. And he's not talking to the students. Keep that in mind. He's talking to the faculty and the staff. Why? Because, and I know this firsthand, because there were many BYU professors, faculty that were involved in organizing the protests. And organizing the protests not just at BYU, but those that followed that went up to Salt Lake headquarters. And so that is another thread that we need to discuss. We've had COVID the last year. There were the protests the year before. They really haven't been addressed publicly and maybe not addressed directly to the faculty and the staff at BYU. So he's doing that. I don't think that's insignificant. I think that is important. And I think that's a part of what he's saying. Again, you may like that, you may not like that, but I think we need to talk about what his words mean. They do not want the divisiveness coming out of certain symbols and language and protests and speeches. That's what they see. I'm going to get back to that in just a minute here. I want to start off with a very ironic statement that he makes here.
Surely our integrity demands that our lives be absolutely consistent with and characteristic of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. At a university, there will always be a healthy debate regarding a whole syllabus full of issues.
Not sure about the healthiness.
But until we all come to the unity of the faith and have grown to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, our next best achievement will be to stay in harmony with the Lord's anointed.
Okay, so, well, that would be in harmony with him. And that's obviously not happening in several areas. So he's asking for that to begin with. That's not going to happen. That did not happen. That is not happening. So that request fell on deaf ears for a number of different people. I just find it ironic that he says that's what we need to do. There is healthy debate. There is going to be controversy. But in the end, we need to rely right now on the Lord's anointed to carry the mission of BYU forward. And in that statement, he also says we have to, surely our integrity demands that our lives be absolutely consistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ. He also says, and I think that this is a flashpoint in there, that surely our integrity demands that our lives be absolutely consistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And to me, part of what he's saying there is the doctrine of the family. Like it or not, that's the position that they are in and that they believe is the right thing to do based on their stewardship. In confirmation of this consistency, he follows up and talks about the doctrine of the church.
We have spent hours discussing what the doctrine of the church can and cannot provide the individuals and families struggling over this difficult issue. So it's with a little scar tissue of our own that we are trying to avoid, and hope all will try to avoid, language and symbols and situations that are more divisive than unifying at the time we want to show love for all of God's children.
Okay. So, again, he's earnest, right? This isn't fake. This isn't a bad man. This is a very good man with a very good heart in a very, very difficult situation. That where you have, the social mores have changed, and does the gospel move along with that? Does doctrine change? It's a very, very difficult situation. But you heard him talk about the language and symbols and situations that are more divisive than unifying. And this is where when you go back and look at some of the stuff I've done in critical race theory and how the church has been involved with racial issues in their public persona, in their narrative, what they always do is they come back to the idea of all of us being children of God. And so whether it's race or whether it's here with sexual orientation, that's the issue. And I think you're going to see this more and more. And if you look for this in speeches over the last several years, as identity politics and social justice politics have risen up, where everybody has not just an identity of their nation or even their race, but all of the intersectional identities of identity politics that people are grabbing onto, the church doesn't like it. That doesn't mean they don't want it at all. Obviously, if you're Latino or if you are Asian or if you are gay or whatever intersectional collective you belong to, group that you belong to, that's part of your identity. But what they don't want, I think what they have decided clearly, is that these are all subject to a greater identity of being a child of God, and that is what we have to focus on. It's a hierarchical structure of value. It's a values hierarchy. And they do not want to see that inverted. They don't want to see it shifted. And so when they talk about the language, it's interesting with the language. I just had a comment from a BYU professor on one of the episodes that I did on language, talking about language and political philosophy, saying that, language is not that big of a deal. Maybe you're just afraid of the language because you don't understand it or it's new to you. Fear of the unknown. No, right? There is language that is divisive, and it is very identitarian. The church does not want to go along with that. That seems very obvious to me. And so the language, the symbols, and the situations, which I believe are, he's talking about the protests, and then the commandeering of the valedictorian speech. They do not want to see the church, and they don't want to see the BYU devolve into a bunch of groups, intersectional groups, all vying for their place in victimhood or their place in power. So it's not just the LGBTQ issue. And he says that right here about the commandeering of the valedictorian speech.
If a student commandeers a graduation podium intended to represent everyone in getting diplomas that day, in order to announce his personal sexual orientation, what might another speaker feel free to announce the next year?
Could be anything.
Until eventually anything goes. What might commencement come to mean or not mean if we push individual license over institutional dignity for very long? Do we simply end up with more divisiveness in our culture than we already have? And we already have far too much everywhere.
Okay, so that's the key right there. You can see that, right? They already see the identitarianism as being very divisive. And of course, where does this happen more often than anywhere in our culture, in our institutions? On campuses, nationwide. So they know where this moves to, and they don't want this to be a part of the church. So yes, it is focused on the LGBTQ issue. However, it's more about identity. It's more about identity politics and vying for power and for status within a group. I think it's interesting that he says that we simply end up with more divisiveness in our culture. I think that perhaps we could say that is not just BYU, but that's the church also. I think they're very concerned about that. Now, before I get into some of the specifics on the response, I want to give one more quote from him. He says, "We have wept and prayed and wept again in an effort to love and hope while keeping the gospel strong and obedience to commandments evident in every individual life." That's the conflict, right? That's the whole thing. When he says that the doctrine of the family is about marriage between a man and a woman, that's it. We can get distracted on everything else. That's not the issue. That's the point that drives the debate. And it is doctrine of the church. It's the doctrine of the gospel. So to change that, you have to change the doctrine of the gospel. And all of everything else around that is just an appetizer. It's a side dish. Now, a point on the Muskets. This has been overplayed immensely. It is, I use this word sometimes, but it is preposterous. It's ridiculous. I want you to imagine that the exact same metaphor of the Muskets is used in a talk about rooting out racism or white supremacy. Nobody is going to start saying what a horrible thing and a call to violence that this is. They're not going to say that. The scriptures use swords and helmets and shields, spears all the time in a metaphorical sense, and that's all it is. And it is amazing to me that what people, social media just brings out, it's hyperbole media. People want reaction, and it becomes the narrative. Here's one comment I saw in his video. It says, "Yes, we don't need a school that promotes gunfire on homosexuality in modern day America." Really? Right? That is a false statement. Nothing like that was ever stated. It's a distraction. And then Another comment, Jesus never taught homophobia. Do you think that, clarity here, do you think that Elder Holland is teaching homophobia? And if so, how is he doing that? Because of the doctrine? Or do you think he dislikes gay people? Let's have some clarity on this. And then you get something like this on Yahoo News. Here's the title, Mormon Apostle, take up muskets against LGBTQ plus equality. That is an atrocious headline. It is so misleading. It is not at all the spirit of what Elder Holland was talking about. But you can see those that are going to fight against Elder Holland and, quite frankly, against the church, right? They're going to be rallying behind this as if this is what he said. Nowhere did he ever say we're pointing the muskets at an individual group. Nowhere. The point of the muskets was that you are defending, if anything, the doctrine of the family. That's what he was saying. And again, you may not agree with the doctrine of the family. You may not agree with the family proclamation, but that's the issue. This here is false. Another podcaster said that Elder Holland was trying to erase gay people. He was trying to shut up those in the LGBTQ community because he doesn't like the fact that someone commandeered a speech, a valedictorian speech. That doesn't mean you're shutting people up. It's a falsehood. He doesn't want divisiveness. He doesn't want people pulling apart our society with different groups, intersectional groups. That makes sense to me. I would recommend you read Jeff Benion's article on Elder Holland. Jeff Benion is a man that has same-sex attraction. He is very supportive of Elder Holland's talk. He talks about how Elder Holland has worked with him and others in providing support for gay individuals in the church. And that is a distinction, by the way, that I wish was brought up much more. You have gay members of the church that are faithful, that follow the law of chastity. And they, in something like this, where's their home? Where are they? You have people that are all the way on one extreme that think that anybody who has same-sex attraction is a sinful person. And then you have people on the other end saying, hey, we're trying to pull you over this way and to go against Elder Holland here and the church because of their doctrine. I mean, kudos to these individuals that are bearing a cross that is incredibly heavy. I have immense amount of respect for them. But they need to be given a voice. Every single gay member of the church, faithful gay member of the church that I spoke to, and there were several, support Elder Holland in his talk. Now, they may not agree with all of the messaging, and I can understand that to some degree because, again, there's no call out to them, right, of those that are faithful and that are following the doctrines of the church. And I think that is important. They need more of a voice. Jeff Benion says in his article that Elder Holland, he witnessed Elder Holland talking to another gay friend of his, and Elder Holland said, we need you in the church. That's who he is. This is not homophobic. We need you in the church, he says. Please stay with us. We love you. Don't you dare leave us. That's Elder Holland. And Jeff follows that up by saying, I would expect we would seek a little more carefully to understand. For people who have been so often unfairly rejected, those in the LGBTQ community, I would expect us to be a little more hesitant before rejecting someone else. Let's put this into context here. Again, why the problem? Why the musket fire? Why the talk about muskets and everything else? It's simply the doctrine. And you can believe what you want on that. Is that going to change? Does it move along? Is it like the blacks in the priesthood? And I think we need to put that into context here. We can talk about the muskets and we can talk about the valedictorian, and it's not the issue. I think we need to understand the issue is the doctrine. You either agree with it or you don't. And on either side of that, that's the discussion. It's the family proclamation. There was another reaction that was very negative from the other side that was caught on video. of a young male, I'm guessing he's a BYU student, that was erasing some writings and symbols and whatnot that were on the sidewalk. Looked like maybe it was around BYU. I'm not sure about that. And he said a disgusting slur. This is a young man who obviously needs to go home and grow up and learn some things and put some rails on his path of life. And grow up. That does not help the church at all. It adds, if you will, if I can use a metaphor, musket fire to those that are pointing their muskets at the church. And by the way, with the muskets, he also gave the example of those that were pointing the muskets at the church and at BYU and at the doctrine of the church. It wasn't pointing out to the LGBTQ community. That's ridiculous. Well, the internet is full of these reactions, hyperbole mostly. And I'm grateful for those that are solid in supporting Elder Holland. You can support Elder Holland and you can support the church and still support those of the LGBTQ community. There are many that are going to try and have you make a decision between the two. I'd be careful of anybody trying to influence you in that manner. I hope that offers a little bit of clarity. I don't expect things to get much better on this going forward. I think, like I said in the last episode, I didn't think that this speech would make a difference. In fact, I thought it would basically, it's like kicking the hornet's nest. And that's exactly what has happened. And I think we're going to see some manifestations of response to this. And things are going to get difficult. I think things are going to get difficult. I'll talk to you next time.